From VQR and the Center for Media and Citizenship, this is episode 13 of Circle of Willis, where I'm talking with Nilanjana Dasgupta about how young women interested in STEM disciplines can benefit from women teachers and mentors. We also talk about Nilanjana's fascinating family history that for generations has combined science and social activism. So what did you do first?
The first study, which I'm going to actually present here, looked at whether in gateway courses that are required for all STEM majors like calculus.
Or the initial chem series or something like that.
Yes,
those kinds
so
of,
this was the initial Calc 1, 2, 3, Calculus 1, 2, 3 series. Does the gender of the professor teaching the class have an effect on female students differentially than male students? Does it affect how much these students like mathematics? Does it affect how much they identify with it? Does it affect their self-efficacy, what grade they think they'll get in the class? Does it affect how much they identify with the professor? All of these things.
You're listening to Nilanjana Dasgupta, professor of psychology at the University of Massachusetts at Amherst, where she also serves as Director of Faculty Equity and Inclusion. I spoke with Nilanjana at a small conference in upstate New York about how learning environments affect whether women who enter college interested in the STEM disciplines actually stick with those disciplines or decide to do something else instead. Many of you will know that STEM stands for science, technology, engineering, and math. And you may also know that women are underrepresented in STEM by huge margins. Here in part one of this episode, Nilanjana talks about the origins of this work, how she discovered the effect of women mentors for young women in these disciplines. And she also gets us up to date on her latest attempt to use this knowledge to develop targeted interventions designed to encourage young women interested in STEM to stick with it. Later, in part two, Nilanjana tells the story of her family history, a history of science and social activism that begins in India and influences her choices step by step to the work she's doing today. We'll also hear about some of her earlier work on what psychologists call implicit biases, the attitudes, beliefs, or stereotypes thought by some to be guiding our actions unconsciously. All right? Okay, let's get back to the conversation.
It took us 3 years to get enough women from these classes, and we found these robust effects where the gender of these calculus professors had no effect on male students in terms of their implicit attitudes towards mathematics, how much they liked.
Okay.
How much they identified with math, their self-efficacy, their predictions about what grade they would get. No effect on men.
Didn't matter.
But it had a huge effect on women. So women who were in sections taught by female professors identified with math significantly more than if their professors happened to be male. They liked mathematics much more when the professor was female than when the professor was male. They predicted they would get a better grade in calculus when their professor was female than male. In terms of actual grades, women actually outperformed male students.
When there was a female instructor?
Regardless of the instructor.
Oh my God.
So essentially that showed that performance was not what was affected by being a small minority in your class. Rather, it was confidence that was fragile. It was confidence that was bumping up and down depending on whether you saw someone like you in front of the class. But your actual performance wasn't affected. But the reason why confidence matters is if you think you're an imposter, even if you're doing pretty well, you're not going to stick around because you think it's an accident. Yeah. And you think that you did well because it's a fluke, because you got lucky, because the exam was easy. You don't trust that it has something to do with your ability. So the likelihood of somebody who feels like an imposter switching out of that major into a different major is really high.
It brings it to mind a bunch of things, but it almost sounds a little bit, Shachter and Singer-ish, right? It's like you're having this sense of this feeling, and you've got to explain the feeling. And so your explanation is, I must not be very good at this.
Yes.
Rather than something that's in fact far more complicated,
Yeah.
which is that, I'm in this sort of sociocultural moment, and I'm having a male instructor who is behaving in a way that, I don't know, what is it about male instructors and female instructors that's making this difference?
Two things. One, we couldn't tell from that experiment, but from future subsequent experiments, what we know that it's doing is that in a context where you are the only one or one of very few and everybody else is very different from you, like these calculus classes, the critical ingredients, it looks like, are two things: feelings of belonging. So this is the social connectivity.
Yeah.
So feelings of belonging plummet when it's a difficult class and there are very few people like you. And that increases the likelihood that you will make internal attributions for difficulty rather than external attributions to the material, or external attributions that everybody is having difficulty. So feelings of belonging is one mechanism, and self-efficacy is another mechanism. If there's nobody like you or very few people like you, and stuff is tough, self-efficacy becomes really shaky. And at some point of time, that sort of fragile self-efficacy predicts switching out into another major.
And it almost seems like they could be linked in a way. This is part of, our perspective from our lab might suggest that the feeling of belonging can support efficacy.
You're right.
In part by reducing cognitive load in a way, by getting all of this rumination out of the way so you can just focus on what you're doing.
Yeah. So
I don't know if that's true.
You're right that belonging and self-efficacy are correlated. But when we do these multiple mediation tests, this is from a different study on mentoring, the recent PNAS paper, where we looked at the effect of mentors, same gender versus other gender mentors, on outcomes like career aspirations in engineering, mediated through self-efficacy and belonging. Both were independent mediators.
Wow.
So nothing trumped the other, but they are correlated.
Can we talk about that new PNAS paper a little bit? Can you walk us through it a little bit?
Yeah. The gist of this whole program of research is something I call a social vaccine hypothesis, or stereotype inoculation. The idea is, just as a biomedical vaccine protects and inoculates our physical body against noxious bacteria,
I love this.
So too, exposure to experts and peers from one's own group inoculate one's mind against noxious stereotypes. So those experts and peers function as social vaccines for the self.
It's so interesting because it carries forward. If it's really acting like a vaccine, it's something that alters you internally as you go forward. That's what you're suggesting. It's not just about the current context, although the current context probably also has an effect, just like being exposed to an illness, might have a current effect.
Yes. So this PNAS paper, we wanted to test social vaccines, but we wanted to test their long-term effects. So we already had these papers showing that professors, experts, people in the field who are already successful can act as a social vaccine and inoculate women in mathematics, in engineering, in science. We had that.
Simply by being
there in person.
Interacting.
Or by reading a biography of a person on a website.
Stop it. Come on.
Yes.
What are you talking about?
Yes.
So I'm listening to you tell me this story, and I cannot help but think about your grandmother and your mother right off the bat in your personal history.
It's not an accident that kids of scientists are more likely to become scientists than kids who don't have a scientist in the family, right?
Right.
And so women who have scientists or engineers as parents or siblings are more likely to succeed in this field. Now, social environment is one. Who knows what other maybe biological influences there might be, but I think that social vaccine idea is a big one. But so the reason I call them, I don't call them role models, is because when I asked these women in the calculus study, how much do you like, or whatever your professors, they liked their male and female professors equally. Because
there's good people out there.
They were good professors.
Yeah.
They were great. We observed them in class. They were great.
But it's not about liking. It's about identification.
It's about identification.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
Can
so,
I be like that?
Can I be
can
like
I
that?
be that?
Yeah. So the more they identified with their female professors, the more they felt that they were confident in mathematics. But for students in sections taught by male professors of calculus, identifying with him had no bearing on their confidence, flat line. So one line goes up, nice correlation between their identification with the female math professors and their own confidence in mathematics, their own self-efficacy, a flat line for male professors. So
Wow.
fast forward.
Fast forward.
So now we're talking about this longitudinal social
Yes.
vaccine.
Yeah.
One question was, can peers function as social vaccines? So somebody who is just a year older than me. So I am a first-year student in engineering. I have a mentor who is a junior or a senior. Can that person be a social vaccine?
Yeah.
Question number one.
Right.
2, is mentoring enough, as long as it's good mentoring, or does the gender similarity matter? My prediction was that it would matter. Question number 3, once the vaccine is done, does the effect last beyond
These
the
are
vaccine?
great questions.
Right? So the answer to these questions was that the mentoring by itself was not necessarily where the action was. It was question number 2, same gender mentoring for women in engineering where the action was. We measured their multiple variables, so feelings of belonging, self-efficacy, career aspirations. We got their grades, looked at retention in engineering, all of that stuff.
Right.
We randomly assigned these women in August or September when they walked into UMass. And
as freshmen?
Yes.
First
First
so
year
you're getting
student
them right
then.
Yeah, that's great.
Sometimes it was during orientation.
Oh,
they had
good.
classes hadn't even started. That was our baseline measure.
That's excellent.
Right? Then we had recruited over the summer juniors and seniors in engineering to be mentors.
Yeah.
We didn't tell them that the study had anything to do with gender. The mentors were 50% men, 50% women. We trained them. We told them they would get like 3 mentees each, that we wanted to meet with them one-on-one. We trained them we ran a focus group on the host of stuff that they could do. We told them that their primary goal was to be their friend.
Interesting.
And that in being their friend and helping them adjust to college, they would probably find out things that their mentee needed, and they could use any of the options that we had taught them about based on what their mentee needed. They were asked to meet once a month, keep this online diary, talking about where they met, how long they met for, what did they talk about, what was their perception of their mentee. This went on for a year.
A year?
A year. So they met no more than 8 times. Actually, most of them met only 4 times, twice in the fall and twice in the spring.
Stop it.
And other than that, it was some texts, some emails, that's it. We tracked the mentees' progress middle of their fall semester, end of their spring semester. So 3 times in the first year. Then the mentees graduated from college.
The mentors.
The mentors graduated from college. So the mentoring relationship ended.
Yeah.
We kept track of the mentees once a year till graduation. So the PNAS paper is the first 2 years of data.
Okay.
And what we find is that from year 1, from the beginning to end of year 1, feelings of belonging in engineering for women with female mentors hold steady. There's no change. Those with male mentors or no mentors, feelings of belonging drop sharply.
Oh my God.
Self-efficacy, same. Self-efficacy or confidence in their own engineering ability, if you have a female mentor, remains steady. Self-efficacy for the other 2 groups drops.
Oh my God.
Career aspirations, same thing. Threat and challenge, so the ratio of anxiety to motivation. Anxiety remains steady for those with female mentors. Anxiety relative to motivation goes up for those with male mentors in control condition. What's interesting is that on some outcome variables, for example, thoughts about switching majors, any mentors makes a difference. But on most dependent variables, retention, belonging, anxiety, the male mentor condition is no different from the control condition. The flashiest numbers are in retention, 100% retention at the end of their first year in college for these students who had women mentors.
100%.
82% in the control condition.
Okay, you're killing me now.
And
That's talk about effect size. 89%.
89% in the control condition, 82% in the male mentor condition. No difference between 82 and 89. Both are significantly different from 100%.
So I'm going to just pretend
Yeah.
I'm a upper level college administrator
Yep.
now, or maybe a dean of an engineering department.
Exactly the person I want to influence. Yes.
Yeah, I'm going to freak out if I see those numbers. Are
So-
you getting freaking out?
I'm getting freaking out from my provost,
Good.
from the university provost.
High five, provost.
Yes. So I gave this talk at this distinguished faculty lecture where both the chancellor and the provost were there. And both of them commented on it. And then the provost said to me that she wants to have the dean of computer science, engineering, and natural sciences. She wants me to do a little mini presentation for those three deans and have me identify sort of the best interventions that I think would make a difference in terms of recruitment, retention, student success, and then have these deans essentially adopt them for all three colleges.
So you're moving now toward a real intervention.
That's right.
But you kind of did it.
I did
You kind
it
of
as
did
a-
an intervention. I mean, it's randomly assigned, right?
Yep. But
And-
now it would be essentially scaled up to
Right.
the whole College of
Yeah.
Engineering
Oh my
instead of
God.
150
I want to do it at
participants.
UVA. First of all, the fact that you're getting these effects with women
Yeah.
in STEM, we all know that women in STEM are underrepresented systematically, and there's been lots of debate.
Yep.
There's Larry Summers' kind of dumbass quote.
Yeah.
And sorry,
I was gonna
Larry.
say, you're not supposed to talk like this. Good thing that you have an editor.
I'll leave it in. But what strikes me as particularly exciting about this is that because you looked at women in STEM, you're not just looking at it all over. You're
No.
targeting a specific
Yeah.
domain where we know there's a
Yeah.
problem.
And even more specifically, not in the life sciences,
Right.
where women are 45% of the student body. Not the faculty, but the student body, and sometimes 50%. So I'm specifically targeting physical science and engineering departments. So engineering, mathematics, physics, computer science. I'm targeting departments and colleges, our engineering is a college at UMass, where the percentage of women is less than 20%. So in engineering, 16% of students nationwide are women. And that's the same percentage at UMass. In computer science, the number is worse. It's like 14% are women. This is 50% of the population. 56% of college students are women, and 16% of engineering students are women. The gap
And it didn't
is huge.
start out that way. I read somewhere that early in the early days of
In
computer science,
it didn't start
it
out this
was
way.
very
Yeah.
equitable in terms of numbers, and
Yeah.
it sort of tumbled off at some point.
Yeah, computer science was seen as, if you've seen Hidden Figures, computer science was
haven't.
seen as a women's field.
Yes.
Because computers were sort of seen as
Secretarial work, yeah.
secretarial work. And then when it became when it became sort of more masculine
More
or
macho.
less, then suddenly, that's actually the history of computer science and who's in it is a great example of why it's a social psychological question of how who occupies that space is a function of what gendered stereotypes we have about computer science.
This is amazing work. And it also really illustrates how direly important. I mean, I'm just finishing up my tenure
Yeah.
in my department as the
Yeah.
director of diversity and inclusion, and we have
Oh,
these
really?
meetings all the time.
Yes.
About how to change the system.
Yeah.
That's one set of questions. But my God, whether the system needs to be changed, it's so important to have top-down representation in terms of diversity. But there's something really hopeful in what you've got going here
Yeah.
too. Because that change in the faculty is
Yeah.
going to take
Exactly.
20,
it's
30
going to take
years.
a long time.
But the mentors is so lovely.
Yeah.
The student mentors is such a
Yeah.
lovely
So
idea.
there are like 6 takeaways for organizations in universities that care about diversity and inclusion.
Let's hear them.
One is increased contact between entering students in fields where they're way outnumbered with faculty like them, whether it be female faculty for female students or faculty of color for students of color and so on. Two, it is true, and this is a long slog, that sort of contact between female professors and new students is particularly likely to be effective if we hire more women in those fields. That's two. Three, even when the numbers are small, leverage peers as mentors and foster mentoring relationships. But in doing those mentoring relationships, ensure that the mentors are similar to the mentees, especially if the mentees are underrepresented. So mentoring is 3. 4, when the numbers are small, use other ways to showcase the success of technical women. It may be through having guest speakers in class. It may be by faculty, male faculty, showcasing the research of a particular female scientist or engineer, and incidentally sort of showing a picture of her and just describing her work as a case study of what they're teaching. But the fact that they show her, not him, essentially is a very incidental, small way of saying that the person who did the science is a woman. So that's 4. And 5 is teamwork, which we didn't talk about. That for classes that involve team science or team projects, avoid teams with a solo woman in STEM. And finally, 6, a lot of these interventions seem to be particularly effective during these developmental transitions, where students are coming in from high school, just starting. So the pipeline leaks at the joints. The joint is in those transition points. So when you're going from one part of the pipe to another, it's the joint that leaks. So if we can intervene at the joints, that's when we're most effective. I came into social psychology. I chose social psychology over neuroscience in the choice to go to a PhD program in social rather than a PhD program in neuroscience.
Right.
Because I wanted to do research, but that had social justice implications.
Oh, so from the very beginning, you were thinking in those terms.
Right. And
that's so interesting, though, because you chose social psychology to address social justice concerns, because we're talking about, it wouldn't strike me as obvious that there was a social psych domain of research that's applicable to policy at that early stage.
No, so there wasn't. So when I went to graduate school, when I went to Yale, I studied initially with Bob Abelson and then with Mahzreen Banaji. And
how about that?
Both of them were very basic social cognition people.
Yeah.
So the first 2 years, I wondered if I had made a right choice.
What am I doing?
It felt too basic.
Yeah.
It felt too basic, too micro.
Wow.
And it felt like there was a big chasm between the research I was doing in graduate school and what I wanted to do, which is where I could see its relevance to some problem.
Yeah.
And in the end, I made my piece sometime around my 3rd year in graduate school. And sort of the piece I made was that I'm good at this. I like this stuff. I understand the reason for the method and the causation and ruling out alternative explanations. And I trust that one day I will come back and be able to apply this to domains where the relevance is obvious.
So what's interesting to me immediately about that is that it suggests to me 2 commitments, at least two commitments. One is to sort of issues of social policy and social justice. Is that fair to say?
Yeah.
And 2 is a commitment to science as an approach for understanding what to do.
As a mode of inquiry.
Yeah.
So the commitment to science, I think, was why I got into graduate school rather than becoming a grassroots organizer or a nonprofit person or all these other things I can do.
That are all wonderful things.
All that are wonderful things.
Important things to do.
So I actually gave this distinguished faculty lecture at UMass, and I made 2 points that there are 2 themes that run through my family and that I think I've sort of so generally inherited that run through my work. One is the value of science. Both my parents are scientists.
Both your parents are scientists?
One is a scientist, one is an engineer.
Wow.
And the other is that the commitment to social justice. Both of my grandparents worked very closely with Gandhi, and my great-grandmother was a feminist writer.
Oh, come on.
I'm
what are you
serious.
talking about? Okay,
So
I need, wait. We can't just skip over that.
All right.
So
all
tell
right.
me a little bit about your grandparents. Do you mind?
No,
Do you mind
not at all.
Can we go into that history a little
Yes,
bit?
yes.
Tell me about that.
So my grandparents were very active in the Indian freedom movement. My grandfather was an administrative judge, sort of the first generation of non-British Indian civil servants, Indian Civil Service, ICS.
Yeah.
So the many first generation people were all white Britons, and then suddenly the British Raj decided to allow this group of people, Indians, to become ICS officers. So my grandfather was part of that.
Wow.
And my grandmother.
And when was that?
This was 1930 something.
Wow.
Yeah. So I think the early 30s or the mid 30s. My grandmother was a mathematics master's degree, a person with a master's degree.
You're kidding.
No, she was
in
really
India in the 30s.
She was very she was very
what
smart.
a superstar.
But she didn't
Holy
pursue
cow.
math, and she essentially became sort of my grandfather's host. But this was in the midst of the Quit India movement, and the World War II was about to begin. And I think Gandhi came to Calcutta, where my grandparents were, and they both got very involved in essentially the civil disobedience movement. My grandfather had to be involved in a very passive way because he worked for the British Raj.
Yeah.
But my grandmother could be very active. So she ended up...
But still risky.
Still risky. So during the Hindu-Muslim riots of 1945, she and all these other colleagues asked Gandhi, we want to be involved, what should we do? And he essentially said, you have to live the life of civil disobedience, of this life. You have to be involved in areas where there are these riots. So she took her infant, my aunt, and went and lived for 6 months in this village where there were these massive riots going on.
Oh my God.
And eventually...
and what did your grandpa do during that time?
He stayed at home and looked after the rest of the kids and went to work.
Holy shit.
And then he had to send her a letter because India got independence while she was in this village. So he had to send her a letter saying, you should come back home. We are now independent. So anyway, they were very active in that. And my great-grandmother, who was widowed at 30, maybe younger than that, her husband died of cholera, became surreptitiously this feminist writer who initially wrote anonymously about the poor treatment of women in Indian society in the 1920s. And then later on started using her name and started writing publicly.
And what was her name?
Her name is Jyotirmoyi Devi. Yeah, so she wrote initially in Bengali, and now those books, the short stories and novels, have been translated in multiple languages, including English. So anyway, so that thread of social justice and the thread of parents who was a scientist and engineer, I think in some ways was sort of in the air and affected.
Wow. So your mother was their child?
Yes.
Okay.
So this is my maternal grandparents.
So your mother grew up to go into the sciences?
Yes, she was a biologist.
Wow. What kind of? Where did she do her biology work?
She got a degree at the University of at Calcutta University. She was a physiologist. She was an animal physiologist.
Wow.
She did all kinds of
work in the 50s, 60s.
Her degree was, I think, in the 1950s. Let's see, she got married in 1961. So around then, her degree was probably in 60 or 61.
Okay.
Yeah.
Also before her time, in many ways.
Before her time, and yeah.
I mean, I've talked to people of that age group who entered, science during that time, and it was not an easy scene, even over here or any place for women during those years.
That's true. I think my maternal side of the family was very intellectual. So it's a family of academics or civil servants.
I see. Yeah.
So one uncle was a history PhD. one aunt was an economics PhD, another aunt was a civil servant. So that side of the family it was sort of in the family.
Wow.
So it wasn't a surprise. I mean, it was unusual nationally, but in the context of the family, it was sort of probably normative that you would go and get a degree beyond your bachelor's degree.
Okay. And your dad?
My dad has his own business. He's now retired. He was an electrical engineer.
Yeah. So he got his degree, went to work.
He got his degree. No, he went to Glasgow. Yeah, and it was too cold and too dark.
Yeah, it's too cold and too dark there.
So then he moved down to the University of London, got a master's
where it's bright and sunny all the time.
It's brighter and sunnier than Glasgow, apparently. And then he got his degree, and then he went to Yugoslavia for a year and worked there, and then came back home and got married, and then started his own business.
Yeah, so you were born in India?
I was born in India.
And in Calcutta?
In Calcutta.
Wow. And how long did you live there?
I lived there till I was 18. My entire primary and secondary education was in India, and then I came to college in the U.S.
Uh-huh. And that was at Smith?
That was at Smith, 1988,
wow.
August.
And so we're all caught up.
August 21, 1988.
1988. How about that? Yeah.
Yeah, I remember that.
Yeah. Wow. So, okay. So you've got this multiple family traditions informing not only a sort of political worldview, assuming the lineage coming from Gandhi and civil disobedience and all of that is relatively what we would call liberal, sort of, progressive kind of worldview, but also this grounding in this appreciation for empirical inquiry, for science.
That's why we went on this detour in the story.
Yeah.
I think the value of science really came from my parents.
Yeah.
It was all about evidence and ideas. We had more books than we ever had toys. Huh. But from my grandparents and great-grandmother came this thing about social justice.
Yeah.
And I should say I'm making the story up in retrospect. This was not what I knew in 1988 or 92 or 97.
But that's part of what's fascinating about those kinds of influences is that they just sort of reside in you.
Yeah.
I mean, we could ask the question, why would you be so interested in science and social justice?
Yeah.
And it's got to involve this pathway, this story, whether it was a sort of deliberate, intentional, conscious thought or not.
And it wasn't. There's a famous Steve Jobs quote that says something. He was talking about his life, where he said, "It's only in retrospect when I look back that I can connect the dots."
Yeah.
I could not connect the dots going forward.
Sure. Right.
And
of course.
This is exact. I think that quote really resonates with me because I didn't know these dots existed. I just sort of followed whatever interests seemed intuitively appealing.
So you've got this broad, sort of relatively abstract interest in using science for a social good. But what starts shaping it towards what specifically you're studying? So you go to Yale to study social psychology after getting your psychology major at Smith. And you're working with Mahzarin.
Yeah.
Why her?
I actually worked with Bob first.
Oh, that's right. I'm sorry. Right. Of course.
And I was, I think, his last student. He was
Abelson, right? Yeah.
So he was retiring, or soon to retire, when I was around doing my master's thesis. And so he suggested that Mahzarin and he co-advise me. And I thought that was a great idea. So the two of them co-advised me. And then when Bob retired, I shifted over entirely to Mahzarin.
And go ahead.
So that's how I ended up working with her. So I was interested in working with her from the beginning. And at Yale in those days, you didn't have to commit to an advisor when you went in.
Wow.
So you were admitted into the program. It was entirely up to you when you chose your advisor.
Right.
So that's sort of why I didn't have an advisor going in, and then I gravitated toward Abelson, and then worked with both of them, and then when Bob retired, worked with Mahzarin exclusively.
Yeah. Wow. And so right away, were you becoming involved, sort of interested in implicit influences on behavior and things?
Do you remember the weird term entitativity?
Yeah.
Okay, so I worked on entitativity.
Stop it.
Yeah, no, that's right. So I worked on how do people perceive groups as being these cohesive, like Don Campbell stuff.
Don Campbell.
Yes.
Yeah.
So how do perceptual qualities about groups make them seem like a unit rather than a collection of random individuals? So entitativity was my dissertation, and then I
What?
got sick of it.
Yeah. As will happen.
Right.
Yeah.
So then I went to University of Washington to work with Tony as his postdoc.
Oh, right.
And it is then that I completely retooled my area of research and started working on implicit bias.
Another interesting guy. Tony
interesting guy.
Greenwald.
Yeah. I think the combination of Mazreen and Tony was really good for me because Mazreen is sort of this big vision, ideas person, and Tony is all about method and rigor and replication.
Yeah.
So the combination was great. But they both believed that implicit attitudes were formed early and you couldn't change them. And I didn't believe that. And I sort of did some experiments with an N of 1 with myself as a participant to try and do these different mental exercises in my own head.
And this
and
was
then
about the time. So the IAT was really in development during this period, right? And there was a lot of wrangling about the right way to score it, and and things like that.
So 1998 was the first JPSP paper on the Greenwald, McGee, and Schwartz.
Yeah,
and that was when I was Tony's postdoc.
I see.
And Mazreen and Tony had a grant together, and I was funded on that grant. I was an international student, so I couldn't apply for an NRSA.
Oh, yeah.
So, but I believe that I had this hunch that implicit attitudes could be shifted around.
And that was not canon at that point.
No,
that was not,
it was not. It was not just.
And Tony doesn't
canon.
do well, in my experience, with violations of canon.
Yeah, it was anti-canon. It was not.
I know.
It was not neutral. It was anti-canon. And
That's
so
great.
I would spend a lot of time trying to persuade Tony to allow me to test the idea that maybe under the right conditions it could be changed.
Yeah.
And he wasn't very open to the possibility.
You're kidding me.
I know, right? So
all props to Tony Greenwald.
So I had a bet with. So I went behind his back, and I collected 20 subjects.
Excellent.
20 people using this intervention, which I created, where I showed people these images of admired African Americans and disliked white Americans with these little 2-sentence bios, and found that the race bias on an IAT was significantly reduced. Well, it
just
wasn't
like that.
Simply as a function of seeing those images and then doing a task where, just to make sure they had paid attention, I showed them those images and then I had them say which description was true or false. So after doing this for about 10 minutes, then I measured, had them do an IAT, and it was reduced. So at a party, I approached Tony and I said, I have these, I have something to tell you. I have these 20 subjects. I have these data.
I love sneaking up on him at a party. That's good.
No, because Tony was far more relaxed at a party.
Yeah, of course.
And much more likely to be open to these ideas that he didn't otherwise buy.
Sure.
So he said,
good strategy.
I don't think it'll work,
like
whatever. I don't think it'll work. Okay, $5. He loves bets.
Oh,
$5
yeah, I didn't
bet.
know that.
$5 bet. I don't think it'll work, but if it works, if it doesn't work, you give me $5, and if it works, I give you $5. So I said, okay. And he said, even if it works, it'll fade away really quickly. So his and my first paper, actually our second paper and my most cited paper, is this Dasgupta and Greenwald 2001 paper in JPSP, which showed that you can use this counter-stereotype exemplar manipulation, showing people positive racial exemplars of one group and negative racial exemplars of another group, or do the same thing for age, and reduce implicit race bias in one experiment, age bias in another experiment. I brought them back into the lab on day 2 without any reminder of the intervention, and and the reduction in bias was still there.
How about that? I wonder if it was bound to context.
Yes, in that study it could be. But in subsequent studies, once I finished my postdoc, we found that contact, so in another study we found that people who had lots of contact with individuals who are LGBT, who were co-workers or friends or family members, that positive contact correlated beautifully with lower anti-gay bias on an IAT.
Yeah.
We also found that this media exposure manipulation, it really worked well with people who had no contact with
the
this
media
outgroup
exposure manipulation being the
lab.
thing that you had done in the
Yeah.
lab,
So
trying
we-
to reduce negative
Yes.
racial bias.
Then we applied it to anti-gay bias, and we found that for people who had no contact with gays and lesbians, that media exposure to now admired gay and lesbian individuals reduced anti-gay bias, but the media exposure had no effect on people who knew gay people in their everyday life.
because
showed
there was a
there was
floor?
close to it wasn't a floor effect, but they were significantly lower in bias, and they didn't go down anymore. So they were sort of fixed. Media exposure did nothing.
Interesting.
Those who came in with no contact showed high bias, and then they came down.
Wow. So you got your $5?
I got my $5.
Yeah.
I got a paper.
What'd you do with it?
I should have saved it. I should have saved it.
Yeah, you should have saved it.
I love this story because because that was it actually really made me realize that you can be a new person in a field and have an intuition that can go completely against the canon, but can actually be right.
Sometimes I even think that a little naivete is a really
Is a good
good
thing. I agree.
Because you don't know what you're not supposed to ask.
This is kind of partly why I like to talk to people who are not social psychologists and sometimes not academics, because the questions they'll ask sometimes send me on a path that I hadn't thought of before.
Yeah.
And that's been gratifying. I mean, just to loop back to the beginning of our conversation, it's gratifying to just disseminate our science to the general public, because the practice of dissemination generates more science, and oftentimes it generates the ability to do the science in the real world, because people will come up and say, I really like that, but I wonder if it would work in a school with an adolescent population. And I'll say, well, if you can find me that school, and I'm a principal of so-and-so school. Our school is a research school. If you want to do a study, then that started the next grant.
So wait, how long are you at Washington?
2 years.
2 years? Just 2 years?
Just 2 years.
So 98?
97 to 99.
97 to 99, and then you're at
and
Amherst?
And then I went to the New School for Social Research.
Oh, in New York City.
In New York City for 3.5 years, and then I moved to UMass in 2003.
So by the time you get to UMass, you're still not doing this latest stuff.
It was at the New School, I had a student who... So the New School is an unusual thing. Graduate students essentially have real regular jobs,
right?
And they're trying to make a career shift, and so the classes are all in the evening.
Right.
The reason I'm telling you the story is I had a graduate student who was essentially a counseling psychologist at a women's college, and she had this idea that this same sort of seeing positive counter-stereotypic exemplars could reduce gender bias or gender stereotyping, stereotypes about who is a good leader.
Who's a good leader.
Yeah. If for women who went to a women's college, more so than women who went to a co-ed college, because you're more likely to see women in positions of leadership at a women's college.
You're not seeing
Exactly.
it has its own organic dynamic that way.
And the president of the college is more likely to be a woman, the deans and so on. So we took our laptops. They did IATs, but they did it in on their campus on our laptops.
Wow, that's
So we wanted to measure, does coming into a college environment where there are women in leadership change these women's implicit beliefs about gender and leadership? And does that change over time as a function of how long they are in college?
Yeah.
So we compared a women's college and a co-ed college, only women.
Yeah.
At time one, when they came into the college, the first month of college, there was no difference in gender stereotypes.
The first month, looking at the two different colleges.
Looking at the two different colleges.
Yeah.
So these are first-year students just walking into college.
Right.
The students at the co-ed college, their gender stereotypes went up. The kids at the women's college, their gender stereotype went down. But the reason I came upon the STEM work is because we found this weird effect that for students, for these women at the co-ed college, the more math and science courses they took, the stronger the gender stereotypes.
Wow.
And I thought, that's weird. That doesn't make any, why would that,
Why
would that
a
be?
specific kind of course?
So then I looked at who was teaching those courses, and disproportionately their faculty in STEM courses were men. So then I thought, oh, this is interesting. So we put that in the paper, but then I was ruminating on it and thinking, if seeing male faculty, mostly male faculty, strengthens gender stereotypes, would that spill over and affect what they think that they can do themselves? And so I was thinking about that do our professors affect what we do? Does our similarity with them then bleed over into what we feel we can do? If we're very different from them, do we think that we can't do it? None of this showed up on our explicit measures. They only showed up on these IATs and when we did a frequency count of who their professors were by gender.
Wow.
So then I started
That's
thinking
incredible.
about stereotypes and how it might unknowingly affect the course of someone's selection of major, their self-efficacy, their motivation, their career trajectory, and so that's how it happened.
Already we're talking about, people talk about a lot, especially in social psychology.
Yeah.
They talk about this sort of, the putative or the theoretically relevant effect of cumulative small effects.
Yeah.
But what you're talking about is leading to a decision. You're talking about putting people on the trajectory down a decision tree.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
each branch of that tree is a major effect.
Yeah. And that the person may be unaware.
They
That
might
they're-
tell themselves whatever, right?
I think their personal experience is that something like my interest changed,
Yeah.
or this is too theoretical, or whatever it is.
And did you ever talk to these students at any point to figure out what are they?
No, I wish I had. It's because this was not what we were after.
Yeah,
we were not
sure.
looking at science and math. But we happened to measure what courses were they taking.
Yeah.
Who were their professors? What was the content of the courses? And it's only when we found this surprising effect that students who took more science and math showed stronger gender stereotypes at the co-ed college, not at the women's college. By that time, our study had long finished. We were in the middle of analyzing the data and writing the paper, and this was sort of an unexpected finding. It was not the central piece of our paper.
Yeah.
Then we realized, actually it's connected to the central thesis because it's these women who are more likely at the co-ed college to have male professors. The students who are taking social science classes, humanities classes, are more likely to have a mix of gender in terms of their faculty. But the students who are taking math, science, computer science had mostly male professors. And so this was sort of a side story illustrating who faculty are that students see in front of the class can affect their perceptions of who makes a good leader. But it was not connected to science and engineering.
And this was still at New School?
This was still at New School.
Yeah, wow.
But this was when
This is the seed.
This is the seed. This is the seed. And so this is
It's very exciting.
This is 2004.
Yeah.
So by now, I had just moved to UMass. I was thinking of writing a grant. And I had already decided that the grant had to do with something to do with essentially the malleability of implicit bias, but now applied to the self, not to perceptions of others, which had been my prior work.
I love that. Applied to the self.
Applied to the self.
Yeah. Because that is a complete inversion.
That's
I mean,
right.
that doesn't show up anywhere in that literature until
Yes, and it didn't show up then. I mean, there was a stereotype threat work.
Right. Yes,
but
right.
That's
It's a little bit different.
It's different.
Yeah.
Because in Claude Steele's hypothesis, stereotype threat is really all about somebody else's perception of you,
Right.
which raises worries, anxieties, whatever, and then affects your performance, but you don't believe it.
Right.
Whereas in what I wanted to pursue is that it gets internalized.
What does the environment teach me about
Yes.
myself?
How does the
Implicitly.
environment how does the environment leave an imprint on my self-concept, and I don't even know that imprint exists?
Wow.
I think I'm the driver. I'm the captain of my ship. But actually, it's the context.
Well, as a fellow scientist and as a father of 2 small girls.
Oh, you are?
Yeah, 4 and 6. This is one of my most inspirational conversations, and thanks so much for talking to me.
I'm very glad. I hope your daughters benefit from you and have your spirit.
Well,
I don't know how the heck you're doing this when you have a 4 and a 6-year-old.
Yeah, I don't either. But I'm glad I'm doing it.
Wow.
I wouldn't trade this for anything.
Yeah.
All right, thanks.
You're welcome.
Okay, that's it. Thanks to Nilanjana Dasgupta for so candidly chatting with me at that lovely upstate New York conference setting, for letting me ambush her, really. I mean, when I realized she was there, I did not want to let her get away without recording something like this, and she was very generous with her time. So thank you, Nilanjana. I owe you one. All right? Folks, the music on Circle of Willis is written by Tom Stauffer and Gene Ruley and performed by their band, The New Drakes. For information about how to purchase their music, check the About page at circleofwillispodcast.com. Circle of Willis is produced by Siva Vaidyanathan and brought to you by VQR and the Center for Media and Citizenship at the University of Virginia. And Circle of Willis is a member of the Teej FM network. You can find out more about that at teej.fm. Special thanks to Nathan Moore, General Manager and swell guy at WTJU-FM in Charlottesville, Virginia, and Lulu Miller, plucky genius, co-founder of the podcast Invisibilia and reporter for NPR News. If you like this podcast, how about giving us a little review at iTunes, letting us know how we're doing? It's super easy and we like it. Or send us an email by going to circleofwillispodcast.com and clicking the Contact tab. In any case, I'll see you all at episode 14, where I talk with Susan Johnson, Professor Emeritus of Psychology at the University of Ottawa in Canada, up there, where she's also a member of the Order of Canada, which is Canada's highest civilian honor. She's going to tell us the story of developing emotionally focused therapy, one of the most widely used and widely studied therapies ever developed for treating distressed romantic couples. Until then, bye-bye.